Okay.
Females should not lift weights. Females should not run. Because we know if females run, God forbid, their uterus falls out, they won't be able to bear children, and they just can't do what they were put on this earth to do. It's crazy to think that not long ago, this was the mentality that here in America we had. You know, when my father was a young kid, this was the mentality 50, 60 years ago. So now, obviously, we're a lot smarter than that. We understand females are just as capable as we as males are at physical activity, running, anything sports related. So we're evolving in the aspect of being able to train these females, and now we're a lot more knowledgeable, and we've come a long way from 60 years ago, thank God. So, quick outline of what we're going to talk about. In regards to the female athlete, we're going to talk about anatomical structure, muscular considerations for training the females, and touch really lightly on some psychological considerations when it comes to training our female athletes. And then we'll get into a little discussion. We came up with a few questions to get the discussion rolling along. So some key definitions for us to understand. I'm pretty sure we're all at this point familiar with all these, just in case. Q angle, it's the angle formed, particularly in our case, with the knees from the hips. We'll get more into that in a minute. Valgus, valgus means the shifting in of knees. So the knees coming in, we know it as bow-legged or knee-knocked, which is a bad thing. We'll talk about that as well. And then the female triad, which the female triad consists of disordered eating, amenorrhea, osteoporosis. So it starts off with disordered eating, which is just any kind of eating disorder females may have, whether it's anorexia or bulimia, which can lead to amenorrhea, which amenorrhea is when the menstrual cycle is affected from this disordered eating. So not enough calories are being taken in while they're expending all these calories, and that's entailed going to affect their menstrual cycle. In some severe cases, no menstrual cycle at all, which is a terrible thing. And osteoporosis, which according to the World Health Organization, osteoporosis, which is bone mineral density, normal bone mineral density, and these are all standard deviations, so it differs by age. Normal bone mineral density is 1 to -1 standard deviation. Osteopenia, which is lone bone mass, which is -1 to -2.5, and osteoporosis, which is severe low, osteoporosis is -2.5 and lower. And it should be noted that severe osteoporosis is when you're osteoporosis and you have history of 1 or more stress fractures due to it. So with strength training females, both genders can train similarly. So this is where a lot of people miss the boat. However, with gender individualization, there's going to be some different emphasis on specific training modes. So 3 major considerations when training female athletes, according to the NSCA. One is prevention of sport-related injury. That definitely carries over for both males and females. Development of upper body strength for females in particular. And most importantly, ACL injury prevention, which, I mean, we're all aware is a huge problem with our field. Or not with our field, but with sports in general.
All right, guys, so the first study I want to talk about is a study done by the University of Pittsburgh. Measured the differences in torsal joint stiffness between genders. 82 cadaver knees were put on a machine that simulated torsal flexion, which was, if you imagine, this is the distal end of the femur, and this is the proximal end of the tibia, otherwise known as the knee joint, right here. Just simulating this motion, all right? It found that females had 25% lower torsal joint stiffness than males. And this kind of holds weight for our industry because there are no other muscles involved in a simulation like this using cadavers. You can't train a cadaver knee. It's literally just the ACL and the bones being tested here. So there's really, it's just an innate property of female knees that we have no control over. And we need to be aware of that as strength and conditioning coaches.
So with that, another study, the second study you guys read, titled "The Effects of Gender Immaturity on Quadriceps to Hamstring Ratio and ACL Laxity." What they looked at was they had 4 groups. They had a prepubescent male group and a postpubescent male group, so after puberty. Prepubescent female group, which is a female who hasn't been through their period yet, and a postpubescent, obviously females who have had their period. So what they did was they took these 4 groups. They were recreationally trained soccer athletes, ages 10 to 18, 123 participants. They provided them with a questionnaire, and in addition to that, they did handheld dynamometer strength tests. So they did knee extension to measure the quad strength, knee flexion, measure the hamstring strength. So what they found was, comparing the pre to post on both genders, they found that the males, so the boys had 179% increase in hamstring strength with maturity compared to girls who only had 27% increase in hamstring strength. So this becomes huge because we know the anatomy of the knee. So the ACL joint, the main purpose of the ACL, the ligament, is to prevent disc or anterior shifting of the tibia. So your tibia, when your quadricep contracts to extend, it shifts your tibia forward. And our ACL is there to prevent that from shifting too far forward. So for example, if someone tears the ACL, one of the tests that athletic trainers do is see how far forward the tibia comes forward. That's how you can tell if you have a torn ACL. So with that, the ACL has a relation with the hamstring, because when the ACL feels that shifting forward of the tibia from the quadricep contracting, the ACL has a relationship with the hamstring, causing the hamstring to fire in order to prevent the tibia from shifting forward too much. So it's kind of an antagonist to the agonist of the quadricep pulling. Does that make sense to everyone? So obviously when we have quadriceps in females increasing in strength, but their hamstrings are falling behind in strength, we already know that they're at a disadvantage when it comes to the ACL laxity. So now we have 2 problems, because we have bad or high laxity and muscle weakness, which is supposed to help combat that laxity. So this is where we see, obviously, females have a lot higher rates of ACL injuries. So what upsets me is the fact that we have no control over ACL laxity. That's just the way females are born. I believe strongly it has to do with birthing. When females go to have babies, their joints shift in and out when they increase in size. So that has a lot to do with why their ligaments are so much more lax. However, the muscular strength, that we do have control over. We can help with that. We can strengthen their muscle strength. So who's not to say that if we were to strengthen, especially hamstrings, so one of the things they said, huge emphasis was strength programs that emphasize close chain hamstring activation shown beneficial to ACL injury prevention. If a lot of these females were to grow up in sports and with a good strength training program to increase the strength of their hamstrings and as well their glutes, which other studies talk about glutes aiding in that, God knows how many more injuries can be prevented in the United States, because we all know that there's such a high number, and it's something that, working with athletes, I know a lot of us that work with athletes, you begin to develop a relationship where, you definitely care for these athletes. You see all the hard work they put in the weight room, on the field, and for all that to just go away because of an injury, that I strongly believe we can reduce that chance of non-contact injury. That's going to make it so much better. Obviously contact injuries, there's not much we can do about that, but it's the non-contact injuries that we want to be able to prevent from happening even more.
All right, so body dysmorphia. A lot of times when dealing with female athletes, they're really concerned about body image. And even males are sometimes concerned about body image, but even more so females. And we have to be aware of that as strength coaches when we do a bod pod test, for example. We need to be made aware of that. They could be very self-conscious about what their body fat percentage is. That's particular to females, especially. And as coaches, we need to use the right verbiage and approach with the correct attitudes. in order to make sure that they're on the same page, that they trust our insight, and know that we have their best interests in mind, and that we really want them to be successful in the sport, and still be able to be social and lead a happy life.
So another problem that I personally have run into when working with female teams, perfect example is women's gymnastics, is the ability to have them buy into your programs. You know, I know with the women's gymnastics team, for example, anytime they touch a barbell, they come to me just like, no, coach, we don't want to get too bulky, we don't want to put on too much muscle mass, because especially a sport like that where aesthetics is part of their sport, you know, how good they can look, how delicate they can look doing a tumble or something. They don't want to put on too much muscle mass, and it's just, sometimes it's tough to try to get them to buy into your program because you know that's not the case. Obviously, there's a lot of hormones that come into effect. They're not going to, you know, bulk up like a football player would, but for us to be able to have them buy into your program definitely is a challenge because, you know, we compare to a team like football who just wants to come in and get better every day, get after it, compared to females. Sometimes it's a little tougher in that aspect. That's a huge challenge. Even if you don't, you know, I know a lot of us want to work with football in the future. 99% of us along the way are going to work with female teams, regardless. You know, you're going to get an assistant position one day. You're still going to have some female teams working your way up. So that's definitely something to consider when working with the female athletes. So one of the first questions we came up with is, what are some of the factors that seem to be overlooked in regard to ACL injuries? So to kind of get it rolling, my opinion, I feel that, especially growing up, the youth and high school athletes are so focused on the sport themselves. So think of progressions. You know, we progress. We start off goblet squatting before we can back squat, correct? So I feel like the athletes are progressed so far in their own sport that their body structurally isn't ready for it. Does that make sense? So they're doing all these drills, cutting drills, you know, speed drills, jumping drills, but in reality, they can't even do a jumping squat without absorbing that force correctly. You guys understand where I'm coming from with that? I feel that's one of the biggest problems. I don't know, what do you guys, you know?
I have something to kind of add to that. I've done a little bit of research on the hormonal effect of food. And a lot of people think that girls who eat a lot of dairy as they're beginning to go through puberty end up going through puberty a lot faster. That obviously affects how fast the pelvis develops. And I also feel like an anterior tilt of the pelvis can also help to cause ACL injuries, just because it all comes down to hips translate to knees, knees translate to ankles. Everything works its way down eventually. And the hip's always going to win over the knee, because the hip's a much stronger joint. It's the strongest joint in our body. Anybody else?
I kind of tend to agree with that. Part of it's probably a lack of maybe flexibility and that kind of stuff. Maybe people or strength coaches not maybe focusing on the flexibility aspect of it, and you know, more the strength and that kind of stuff. And they don't have that flexibility in their back to, you know, get down in a proper squat. Right.
I think one of the things I see is that a lot of females are hypermobile, and a lot of people continue to see a hypermobile female athlete, and this can even go for guys as well. I mean, it doesn't matter what age, and continue to stretch them as when they need stabilization, and working on just distinguishing who's hypermobile and who needs more flexibility and who needs more stabilized.
Sounds like it comes a lot from the lack of proper training of females at an appropriate age. By the time they get to high school or get to college, and they actually have their first experience with a strength coach, it may be already kind of too late to stop. Only 27% of them, or they've only had an increase of 27% in their hamstrings. By the time they're trying to start training and doing some of the things that the strength coaches expect and the sport coaches expect them to be able to perform, they're at a really heightened risk. So it needs to come back down to the high school
or even like if you consider high school, you know, we've been talking all week about high school athletics. I don't know many females who train in high school strength conditioning. It's, you know, it's primarily football, right?
Oh, yeah.
We all know that. Even basketball, my basketball male team, my men's team didn't train. It was just the football coaches putting their guys through the lift because that's a sport where you really want to get bigger and stronger and faster.
I'd take it even a step further back, and how you started your conversation was discussing 50, 60 years ago the perception of,
Right.
you know, of training, but 50, 60 years ago, you know, young female athletes were running and jumping and on the playground and, you know, and participating in a lot of different sports, and they were out falling and landing and jumping and, you know, and now you take it and you look at it with specialization, you know, they might play only one sport, so they're not learning how to be an athlete. Combine that with technology and video games and things along those lines, and it's just, you know, they're not free playing very much anymore.
I think piggybacking off what everyone's saying is the progression is all wrong. So they don't train in high school, and when they do train, if they're training on their own, they're going to do, you know, some P90X thing, or their sport coach is going to put them through them, and the progression's wrong. They're not learning to absorb force first. The first thing they're going to do is load their weight. They're going to do some kind of jumps. They're going to be creating force. First thing they do is learn mechanics. So we can teach them mechanics, teach them to control their own body weight, absorb force. Then we're going to get them to create force and, you know, be an athlete. And then from there too, it's just lack of education. You know, obviously posterior chain development is a huge issue here. You know, you go to any female at Planet Fitness, you know, she could be a college athlete, and what do you see her doing? She's going to squat, she's going to lunge, maybe she's doing leg press, maybe she's doing leg extension, and maybe leg curls at the end as her posterior chain work. But she's going to do all these quad dominant exercises and not really target the posterior chain. So if we can get them to absorb force and work that posterior chain, teach mechanics, I think we'll make a big impact there.
Anybody else with this? So what emphasis do you recommend for building overall strength in female athletes? So, you know, definitely sometimes, like I had mentioned before, there's a lot of resistance from female athletes. A lot of it I know comes from trust, building that relationship and setting that foundation. What has worked for you guys, for those who have worked with female athletes, for building, you know, overall strength?
Well, what's worked for me, I mean, I've had to learn the hard way a lot of times to come into a workout with the right kind of attitude. I mean, it's obvious, but it's sometimes overlooked. We have to treat them differently. I can't scream at a girl underneath the back squat to get up off the bar like I can in defensive line. You just can't. It's a totally different mentality. And if we're going to really coach females in the future, we have to be knowledgeable about that transition. We have to flip the switch and turn into a different person for them, for their sake, ultimately for our sake.
I agree. It's going to be very similar to males. What you're doing, you're still going to have, you know, bilateral knee dominant, bilateral hip dominant, single leg knee, single leg hip, you know, the total body lift, just like you would a male. But training those movements doesn't have to be so stereotypical. And like I think you and I talked about it, you alluded to it here. If you have, you know, barbell RDLs on your card, maybe a female doesn't want to do that because she's too scared of getting bulky, but you hand her dumbbells in her hand, you get her to do that. Essentially, it's the same thing, but in her mind, you know, you talk about the psychological aspect, it's completely different for her. So yeah, you treat them differently, but you're still going to get the same, you know, result as if you're training a male team.
Pretty much kind of what you were saying, is getting them excited to come into the weight room. The high school that I was working at, the head strength coach there, one thing he taught me was you do have to treat the females differently, and that girls want to talk. And so what he learned was, as long as they're getting after their work, he's going to let them be a little bit more social, because that makes them happy to be in the gym. He's not going to yell. He's just going to do a lot of motivating, and a lot of girls want to please. So, you know, he's going to say, "Great job," you know. So, you know, a lot of positive reinforcement. Just getting them happy to come into the weight room.
Like you said, I mean,
just talking with some of my friends that are, female athletes, they'll remember that time you yelled at them. And if it was in the weight room and they were doing bad, I mean, they're gonna be afraid to go back because they don't wanna get yelled at again. They want, the good job, the great rep. They don't want the, negative attitude that, a football player can handle.
I think that also goes, I mean, not to single out female athletes, but I think that really goes for everybody too.
Yeah.
Know who you're coaching, don't just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's defining good too. That's something that, to piggyback off that, is, it doesn't matter what the athlete, what age, gender, it's finding what buttons to push, and they all want to be better at their sport. Every athlete wants to be better at their sport. And so you got to break down misconceptions, So the misconception is that if I lift, I'm going to get big. Well, I can show you a CrossFitter that trains 8 hours a day, and she's exactly the way you want to look. Or, a Miss Fitness competitor trains 8 hours a day, and that's exactly the way you want to look. Or I could show you somebody that's being enhanced and how you don't want to look, and so finding what motivates them and then being able to break down misconceptions will help.
I know for me, like one thing I thought about was trying to see what elite programs are doing in this sport. So for example, Springfield's a Division III women's gymnastics, for the example I was using. I always think about if I can find a video of what Florida's doing, because Florida, Alabama, LSU, and I see them on ESPN, these female athletes are Olympic ready. They, a lot of them are going to go to the Olympics to represent the United States. And I always just wish, man, if I can find just a video of them training, see what they do, show it to my girls and say, hey, look, this is what we need to be doing to get you guys to the next level. So just a couple of things to think about in that aspect. And then lastly, how can we have our female athletes buy into our programs without the fear of bulking up? Basically what we were just talking about.
That just goes back, I think, to like the education on the misconceptions. I mean, it's important to explain the differences in the male and female body as opposed to like testosterone and estrogen is they can strength train without, bulking up. It's, they'll get stronger, but it's just really not possible for them to grow as much as males with that differences in the hormones.
Definitely. Anybody else with that?
Would you say that we're trying to really create a mind-muscle connection more so than creating muscle mass?
Well, yeah, and just as far as like education on the differences in the body, just understand that it's okay for them to come in, without that fear, because it's so common, not even in just athletes, just women in general that go to your fitness center. So.
Right. Well, it's also tough because we had a female on the soccer team who she did bulk up really easily, relatively speaking for a female, and they called her nickname was Diesel. They would call her Diesel when she was, she was a beast on the soccer field. She was a great track athlete as well. And at the end of the soccer season, I was talking to her and I was just like, you ready for the off season? We're gonna get after. She's like, yeah, but I don't think I want to lift, because her perception of that, she didn't like it. It was kind of ironic because they all called her that, but inside she actually didn't like being called that, or she didn't like the fact that she got so muscular. So individuals like that, man, they're so tough. So tough, because I told her, I was just like, look at you on the field, you're one of the most feared. Just psychologically, other players feared her because she was very muscular, she was strong, fast, she was just bulldozing girls over. But you just got to find that balance, and it's really tough with any athlete. But it's so, and then that's just something that keeps me going, because I'm just trying to find it, and it's the chase that I love too. So.
All right. Great job, guys.
Any questions?